What's going on with that pen?
Yeah. It's my. I know. It's kind of distracting.
It's a little blinding.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, it's interesting. When you can change what the shapes of the design are without changing the placement and the arrangement of your objects, then you're manipulating the design and not interfering with your ability to convey the narrative. Right?
Say that one more time.
You think I can say that again?
Well, try.
Here's a painting by Calvin Liang. Okay, now he has this spire dead center in this painting, but the design still seems to work, right? I thought it was a beautiful design when I first saw it. So why does that design work? Because go ahead. No, tell me.
Oh, because that's not what you see at first. You see the dark shadows.
We're looking at the shapes of the value, right? So I'm going to show you what the shapes of the value are on that. And we'll see if we look at this painting in a little bit different way. Okay. Here's the same painting this way.
Mm-hmm.
You see that this is just a part of a bigger shape, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's how he gets away with it. So by connecting this to the bigger shape of dark and making that itself a beautiful shape, we can have an object which is dead center, but a shape which is part of something that continues off somewhere else and becomes a dominant shape or a subordinate shape or somewhere in between. It's connected to other things, okay? And so you see that the shape of the value is no longer the shape of the object. And that is critically important because if you want to tell a story, you've got your narrative thing in there, you need to be able to make the shapes what the shapes are. And the shapes of values are the thing that design the composition, not the shapes of the objects. That's one of the most important things you have to understand about design if you're going to do representational paintings. Your large shapes not only don't have to be the same as the shapes of your objects, but shouldn't be the same as the shapes of their objects. When you're changing the shapes of the values, and where we decide those value breaks are, right? So there's a three value. I always have to start with three value studies. We start with the three value because it gets rid of all the complexity of the gray area and lets us do, okay, here's our shape of light, here's our shape of middle, here's our shape of dark, and what are they, right? It helps us see all of that. Once we make those not the shape of the objects in the painting, and we are able to sort of connect the darks, connect the middles, connect the lights, put them up against one another within a form, outside of a form, and let the shapes of values spill off of forms onto other things. We are designing with a shape, an abstract shape, that is not the shape of the things, okay? But it still becomes the things. We're still looking at this, and it's still descriptive of all of this form, right?
So that's
we
when
still see the Kenyan, piece,
Kenyan
whatever it
Deshe.
is. It Kenyan Deshe?
That's when you're making the decision to push it darker or push it lighter or push this middle into light or push this middle into dark or whatever, because you're looking for the overall shape of that.
Right. So when I do this, for example, I'll just go on value rear for a second here because this really helps you see the way that I'm thinking when I'm approaching design. If I just adjust this a little bit to say, okay, I've got less contrast, I've just changed the shape of that middle dramatically. I've affected the design when I do that. If I come this way and say, okay, I'm going to lighten everything, now I've affected the design in a different way. So when I'm looking at a scene and I find a path of something, an arrangement of something that's pleasing, where I choose to draw the line of what becomes a dark, what becomes a light, what becomes a middle, is how I'm choosing to put the design together without changing what I'm seeing. I'm changing what the shape of this is. Do I make the shape of this the important thing, or do I make the stuff the important thing? In a good painting, we make the shape of this the important thing. And the stuff is incidental. The viewer doesn't have to know that, okay? A sophisticated viewer will know that. But the viewer doesn't have to know it. The viewer can look at a painting and see the stuff and just like it without understanding that it's the way you've masked these shapes that makes it so pleasing, okay? These are all different ways of looking at the same scene, and they're all accurate. We never want to take the decision of of how we break those things down out of our own hands. We want to be proactive in how we view the scene, right? We're not just letting the scene happen to us and translating that on the canvas. So some of them, if we keep going through this, some of them are going to be better designed than others. Now, it's a question of what aesthetics you're following, what the purpose of your storytelling is, as far as what's a good design. But generally speaking, this would be one of the weaker ones. We have very scattered lights. We have darks that are sort of spotty and broken, and we have a middle that is sort of sweeping over thing, but it's not particularly descriptive, right? If we take this and we push it back towards this direction, our darks just got a lot better here, right? The shape of the dark got a lot better. The shape of the light didn't, but the shape of the dark got better. So when I'm looking at this scene, I might be thinking, okay, I want that for the shape of my dark. The shape of my middle, it's pretty good, but the shape of the light is completely uncompelling. So, so I would be pushing maybe this way, maybe this way. Gotta find it. Now the shape of the light's a little better. It's holding together as a shape. It's standing against the middle, and it's being a little bit descriptive of some of the light that's going on. Yes, it's creating more of a path through the painting, right? So by just deciding where we draw the line between those things, now we can manipulate what the abstract shapes in the painting are doing without changing the drawing at all. Without even, not to say that we can't change the drawing, not to say that we can't move to the left or the right, or sit down or stand up on top of the car and get a little bit different view of it. We can do all of those things, and we can crop in and we can zoom out. We can still do all of that, but even if we all had to paint exactly the same composition, we could still find different ways of making different abstract shapes that are 100% accurate. That's a powerful thought, right? And it's so important to being able to impose the shapes you want to see onto your design without ruining your drawing. You have to be able to understand, that just where you draw the line between what's light, what's dark, and what's middle, and isolating it into those three shapes allows you to manipulate the design of your piece. Yeah.
You said something earlier about connecting
Yes.
the darks to something.
Right. So if I isolate this, and so that this becomes, and I don't know my buttons that well here, but I can isolate this so this becomes just a shape right in the middle of the canvas. That's not going to be as good as if I connect that into one big, powerful, abstract shape that is offset, right?
Okay.
So I'm going to have fewer shapes. They're going to be more descriptive, and I want to have beautiful edges to them. I want to have a combination of slow and fast edges. I want large shapes set against small shapes. I want all of those things. I want interlocking shapes. I want a spot of the dark in the light and a spot of the light in the dark. I just don't want same against same against same.
Okay.
If I've got, three things, I don't want the space between them to be the same as the space of the thing. I don't want my negative shape to match my positive shape. I always am looking for how to make that design constantly changing. Put a different thing against a more different thing, against a bigger thing, against a smaller thing, against a patterned thing, against a simple thing, a dark thing against a light thing, and always changing, fast edges against slow edges, and so on, moving through. So that we're finding variety. No, you can get down to where there's one shape, and that's not very interesting at all. So
You just don't want it spotty.
we don't want spotty, generally. With spotty, we get into the realm of the Gerhard Richter painting we looked at. We get into the realm of Jackson Pollock. It's another kind of thought on design. It goes towards the idea of pattern or repeating shapes and decorative, but away from the sort of more solid format of light, shadow, structure, those kind of things. So if you want to convey structure, you want to get away from the sort of spotty darks, spotty lights, spotty kind of stuff like that. And what's typically considered good design in a more classic design sense, anyway. And this is separate from what Gerhard Richter's doing. It's separate from what Jackson Pollock's doing. But where we get to what's considered classic good design, we're looking at the sort of 5 to 7 shapes, interlocking, different sizes, different shapes. Okay. Interlocking is kind of important. But if you don't do interlocking, you end up with something else that's kind of interesting, a whole other style, which is what Eric Merrill's doing, what the symbolists were doing. They have these rounded, sort of lumpy things, right? They don't interlock very much. Hiroshi Yoshida, interlocking, right? But this is a good interlocking shape, right? The way that this dark fits into the light and middle around it, it's locked in. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. It only fits in that spot, and where there's space in between, the other shape comes in and locks in like that, right?
Edges.
Defined edges of interlocking shape. If we go back and we look at some of the Gustav Klimt landscapes, where we have these sort of flowing curves and stuff, and the whole thing's defined by that, it's almost like the pieces could slide against one another, right? They're not locked in that same kind of way. So that goes outside of what is sort of considered classic strong graphic design. The classic strong graphic design is, fewer shapes. The 7 that you'll find is not a lot of shapes to put in your painting. It's almost hard to get it down to that few shapes. And they interlock. There's a bit of this one in that one, right? There's that yin-yang kind of quality. There's a spot of light in the dark and a spot of dark in the light on those interlocking shapes. Darks are kind of an interesting thing because in a lot of scenes, the darkest darks only happen right at the bottom edge underneath the objects. And so they can turn into lines real easily, and they can turn into spots real easily. What we need to be doing when we're designing is taking a broader idea of what a dark is, right? Instead of saying a dark is anything that's a 9 or darker, say a dark is anything 6.5 or darker. When you do that, you get that big mass of a dark, and that's going to give you a more simple, powerful graphic kind of design. Now, at the edge of that dark mass, we're often going to find opportunities to be descriptive. And so darks are a lot of times your most descriptive shape. Let's take a look at this painting right here. Okay, the darks in this painting are the descriptive shape. The lights are kind of a pattern, right? The dark is showing you the shape of the structure, where light is hitting versus shadow. Darks are very good for being the descriptive element in a painting. That's not to say you can't make your lights the descriptive element in your painting. It doesn't mean that you can't make both the descriptive element. But as a natural tendency in landscape painting, darks are a wonderful opportunity to be defining your structure and your objects and your edges. The reason that this is so interesting to me is because I'm a great lover of the Art Nouveau, and I love the Japanese woodblock, and I love the shapes that are made on that. Those elegant calligraphic shapes where we go from line into mass and back to line. What happens at the edges of things where we have, we'll call them like sky holes, right? But sky holes can happen in the space between your hair that comes out over here and the hair that's up close to your head. They happen at the edge of just about anything if you really look for a way to make it happen. So, so what do those edges, what do those negative shapes look like, right? When we have 3 values, they all have beautiful, interesting shapes. They're arranged in a pleasing way on the canvas, and they're also descriptive of the scene and descriptive of the form. Now we have something